Started. So we are going to do two questions today. Oh, let me share my screen. So we're going to do two questions today. And one of those, let's rip the band-aid off, is going to be my splice, right? So my splice is just a monster of a problem, right? It's just there's so many things that you need to keep track of, right? You need to keep track of things you're keeping. You need to keep track of things you're deleting because that's what you're returning. And then you have to make sure that the original array that I passed into this function has changed, right? However, if you think about it, these three things that you need to keep track of can be split up into sections, right? So let me show you what I mean. So this is going to take an array. It's going to take a start. It's going to take a delete count, not a stop index. See, I feel like splice also confuses people because the second parameter of splice is a delete count, a number of things you're deleting, not an index of where to stop. Okay? So, and then an optional new value. Okay? So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm thinking aloud. I think that I'm going to make two separate arrays, and I'm going to say everything I'm keeping is going to go in array 1, and everything I'm deleting is going to go in array 2. And we'll talk about mutation later. Okay? How about that? So I could say let kept elements equals this array, and let deleted elements equal that array. Okay? So let's talk about what are we going to keep, right? So we know that they're going to give us a start index, and we don't have to worry about if they don't pass anything in. Okay, we don't have to worry about for this problem. But otherwise, I would just say start equals 0, right? I would just say start equals 0, right? But I'm not going to do that. So what are we going to actually keep? Wouldn't you agree that if we have a start index, everything before it has to be in the array, right? Because if we're starting here and going that way, everything on this side of the start should be kept. That's not going to be deleted, right? So we can automatically start at the beginning, loop to the start, and say kept elements dot push array at I. Okay? Everybody with me so far? So now that we have this, now, after we have this, and here's the start, here we're going to start deleting, right? However, there's also one other thing we need to check. We need to check about this new value, because where we start deleting is also where we are supposed to add a new value. So before we even worry about that, this should have been a little bit like straightforward. Right after you got everything to start and before you start deleting, now that kept element has everything before the start, now we could just say if new value is not equal to undefined. That means if somebody passed it in, right? Then we could say kept elements dot push new value. Because that is where the added value will be, right? At the start index, right? So now that we've taken care of this, we can start deleting things. But not really deleting things from the array, but taking the elements that should be deleted and putting them in our deleted elements array, right? So we know what's going to be deleted. And this is actually the most important part of the function because this is what the function is returning. Splice returns a new array of all of the elements that were deleted, right? So, you guessed it, we're going to do another for loop, but this time we're going to start at start, okay? And where do we stop, right? We have a number of things where to delete. So we can't just do I is less than delete count, right? Because it's not an index. If we started at index 5 and the delete count is 1, this loop would never run, right? If I is 5 and I is less than 1, right? That doesn't make any sense. So what we have to do is start plus delete count. The start plus the delete count will be the new index of where we want to stop. And then we just I plus plus like a normal day. So now we do deleted elements dot push array at I. Right? Who's confused by this? Anybody? Voice. Say something if you're confused.
Could you just explain it one more time?
Sure. So, are you good up to here? So, now that we have like let's say I wanted to delete the 2, right? So that means start would be 1, right? So if start is 1, that means we loop until start, right? So we get this first element into kept elements, okay? Then ignore this line, but now we start at 1, right? We start at 1, and then we go until start plus delete. I is less than start plus delete. Start plus delete, it's 1, 1, so that would be 2, right? So we go until here. But it's less than, not less than or equal to, right? So that means we won't actually hit here. So we just push this into our deleted elements. Because we're going to be stopping and starting and stopping at the 2. Does that make more sense? I feel like that's more confusing. So like the start. All right, is it good? Okay. So now that we looped from the start and then the start plus the delete count, because it's just a count and not an index, and we got to here, right? So everything in the middle we are putting into deleted array, right? And now that we have that, what about everything after the delete count? Don't we have to keep those as well? We're not altering everything, right? So that means we do another for loop. But this time, we say let I is going to be equal to what? Start plus delete count. Why? Because that's where we stopped before. That's where we stopped. Okay? I is less than array.length. We go until the end. I plus plus. Right? Now, we do kept elements dot push array at I. Besides line 10, do you see a pattern? We start at the beginning, we loop to start. We start at start, we loop to start plus delete count. We start at start plus delete count, we loop to the end. These are all in sections, okay? The end sections go into kept elements, and the middle section goes into deleted elements. Because the middle section is where we're deleting shit, right? And then here, if new value is not undefined, if we are adding something, we put that, we can do this here, or we can even do this here, right? It doesn't really matter as long as we do this before this step, okay? Because it has to go before the end remaining elements. Cool? So now, we are going to return delete count, deleted elements, right? But there's still one thing we have to do. We have this kept elements array, but like we have to make array this, right? So an easy way to do this is to say array, it says while array.length array.pop. So that means while array.length, right? So when would this ever be false? When would this ever be falsy, right? When it's 0. When it's an empty array, the length is 0, and 0 is a falsy value, right? So that means that will break this. And what does pop do? Pop pops things off from the back every single time, right? So eventually there will be nothing left to pop. You'll pop off the last thing, and then the length will be 0. So then while array is empty and pop mutates the original array, now array, the thing we passed in, is completely empty. So now we can do for let I is equal to 0, I is less than kept elements dot length, I plus plus, and we can do array dot push kept elements at I. And we'll push everything from kept elements into array. And push also modifies the array. And here is my splice with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops. 5 separate loops. The way to tackle this problem is to split it up into sections, okay? And I know people, I saw people yesterday were doing like dot push array shift or something like that. Like you push like a shift or something like that. I would strongly advise you not to do these things, okay? I would strongly advise you not, like, you see how I'm going off of kept elements.length here? I would strongly advise you not to change the length of this array inside of this loop. I really wouldn't, because that's what you're basing this off of, right? The whole time you're checking to see if I is less than kept elements.length. And if you're changing the length down here, then it becomes harder to keep track of, right? You could do it, but it's just like harder to keep track of. So I just recommend not doing that. Any questions on my splice?
Yeah, I have a question. So, the code from line 17 to line 19. When I was doing it, when I was trying to empty out the original array, I had done array equals like empty hard bracket, and that was not working.
Yeah.
And I was not sure why it wasn't working.
So you're saying why
Yeah.
this doesn't work?
Yeah, why that doesn't work to empty it, yeah.
Because this, what are we actually doing here? What we're doing here is we're saying this variable is now going to hold a new empty array.
Oh.
What it was holding before still exists in memory.
Okay.
Does that make sense? So we never changed that.
Oh.
Now we're just changing what the variable is holding, right? This is going to be holding a reference to a new array. The old reference is still pointing to that array, and it's still what we passed in, right?
Oh, wow. Yeah, okay. So that would actually basically just mean like array 1, 2, 3, an empty array. Like we're just appending that empty thing at the end of the original array, is what you're saying.
What, this?
Yeah. Like you're saying like this isn't overwrite, that empty thing is not overwriting the entire array. It's just kind of like adding that at the end of what already exists. Is that what you mean?
It's not adding it to the end, it's replacing it. Like, it's replacing it inside of the array variable. The array variable can hold one thing, right? Like, variables can hold one value, right? So it was holding our original array that we passed into the function, and now I'm saying it's going to hold something else. So that means that original array is now just in memory somewhere.
So my question is, sorry, because it's just like, you know, I was basically trying to do what we did in row 17 to 19, which is like empty out the original array by doing row 20. And obviously it didn't work, but I think I'm struggling to understand why. Because if you're saying that empty thing did replace what was originally there, wouldn't that just be an empty array?
No, because the thing that I'm replacing still exists.
Oh.
It's somewhere else in memory. We've just lost track of it now by reassigning this variable. That original array still has everything inside, right? This is the same thing as doing like, this is the same thing as like slicing this out and then doing this, right? Because this is a brand new array. This is new, right? So if we push everything into here, we return deleted elements, this gets lost after the function's done, right?
I
Because this array is basically being created inside of the function, right? Where this is coming from outside of the function. So when we console.log, like if I pass this array into here and then I console.log it down here, it'll be the same.
Yeah, that was the issue I was having. Okay.
Because
yeah.
we never actually change it. We just reassign what array is holding, right?
Right.
Reassignment is not the same thing as mutation. Not the same thing.
Okay, got it. Yeah, thank you so much.
Any other questions before I do deeper copy? If you couldn't solve this problem yesterday, relax. All right? Just relax. This is a hard problem, okay? So, anyways, let's do deeper copy. Oops. So, unlike my splice, I think that deeper copy is a little self-explanatory, right? So, this is going to take an array. And what we want to do is we want to return a copy of the array, right? So I'll just return array.slice of 0, right? Or I'll return, right? Spread out the original array, right? This works, right? No, this doesn't work. Because what if this array had a nested array inside of it? That means that that nested array that was in here is now the reference gets copied over, and not the, we don't actually make a copy of that array, right? So this is not good. We can't do this. We have to do things that are more complicated. So let's say let copy array equal to this empty array. And we're going to start looping, right? We're going to start looping through this original array. Cool. So now we have to make a check, right? Because there's two schools of thought. If it's like not an array, like a number or a boolean or like a string, then we can just push it in, right? But if it is an array, we have to do another loop through that array, and before that we have to make another array variable, do a loop, push everything into there, and then push that entire array into copy array, okay? So we do like if array.isArray, whoops, right? Because this is how you check if something's an array, not with type of. So array.isArray of array at I, right? So if this is true, then we will say let nested copy equal another empty array. And then we'll do another for loop, right? Let I equals 0. I is less than array of I dot length, because this is the thing that we're going to be looping through. And then I plus plus, right? And then we'll do nested copy dot push. And this is we're only going 2 levels down, right? So nested copy dot push array of I. Oh, whoops. Look at me. Nope. We had to change it to J, my bad. Array of I of J. Right?
Have an I in, oh,
this?
Never mind, you're right.
Yeah, this has to be I because array of I would be this thing, right? That's the thing that we're checking. This is the actual array. So we do another for loop in here for let j equals 0, I is less than array of I dot length, j plus plus, and then we push in array at I, which is that array, at j, which is the element in there. Right? Then after that for loop, we do copy array dot push. What the hell? Nested copy. And then we have an else statement outside here, and we say else. If it's not an array, we just do copy array dot push array at I. And then we return our copy array. And that's that. So to avoid like confusion like that, what I could do is I could say like, well, we still have to make it J, but like if I didn't want to do this, I could have pulled it out over here like, like let current L equal array at I, right? Sometimes this is useful to do if you're doing nested for loops, right? But I didn't do that. Okay?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
So when you're doing problems like this, and it says something like two-dimensional array, is it safe to assume that an array with an object in it is not two-dimensional?
Yeah, I guess you can assume that. Like, an array of objects, I would never call two-dimensional.
Okay. So we didn't need to do any tests to see whether or not they had an object.
No.
Okay.
But, like, you would see how that would work, though, right? Like, we would do if array.isArray is true, we do this nested for loop, right?
Right. But
Else,
if it was an object and we had coded it this way, we'd have an issue, right?
Yeah, but then we do an else if type of is object, then we do a for in loop and push all the values in there, right? Then if it's not, then we would just push the thing in there.
No.
So you
this is sometimes the biggest challenge is trying to figure out what they're asking for, though.
No, 100%. If you don't know what they're asking for, though, just read the tests.
Okay.
Like, if you guys go down and, like, down below how it says, like, describe?
Right.
And then it has,
but on the actual thing for what are those called? Those aren't called projects, they're called challenges, or that we're going to talk about today, later. Will we be able to see the tests on that?
Oh, the projects? No.
Not the projects, the other things. The two things that we take.
Oh, the practice assessments?
Yeah.
So, yes and no. So, like, you'll see, let's say 5, but what will be running against your code would be like 40.
Oh, okay.
Like, there'll be like 35 hidden things that you won't know what I'm passing into your function. Which, in my opinion, is stupid and annoying, but that's just how the environment is. Like, you'll be taking the test on HackerRank.
Okay. Because I did this problem wrong, and I passed all the tests, and I copied it out into Replit to see what it was actually doing. And it was doing it wrong, and then I fixed it and still passed the test. So it was just kind of funny that you could do it.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes
that doesn't always.
Yeah. I mean, like these workshop problems were made so long ago and need to be updated, honestly. But yeah, you could definitely pass the test in like weird, wanky ways, even though the code you're writing is actually wrong.
But that'll be different on the assessments.
Yeah.
How old are the problems?
How old are the problems? I have no idea. 5 years. I don't know. I could find out for you guys maybe. But yeah, I have no idea. Maybe like 3 years, 4 years.
So I have a question. Just can you just tell us one more time on line 30 why it is I, in that loop, why it is I is less than array that I that length?
This right here?
Yeah.
So
why it's I? Yeah, sorry, yeah.
What is array of I?
That's like the basically the array that's nested in there.
Right. So let nested array equal array of I, right?
Yeah.
Does this make more sense?
No, yes, I get that. Sorry, my question is why we're why it's I is less than.
Oh shit, my bad. That's just a typo.
Oh, how did it still work? Oh, whatever.
I didn't run it. Yeah, I just. That's just
a
typo.
Okay,
that's my
great.
bad.
Okay, well then I'm not going crazy. Okay, the other thing.
No, that's a good catch. Thanks.
Yeah. Sorry. The other thing was So when I did it originally, I was kind of just like like initially just like pushing in everything to the array, which is obviously wrong, right?
Sure.
But then I didn't understand. So when I pushed original array, when I pushed that nested array dot slice, that worked.
When you did this?
Yeah, dot slice.
Like
though.
instead
like
of that, yeah, you can do that too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask why that works and why not just pushing the nested array doesn't work. Like why pushing that what you're highlighting doesn't work, but if you push that dot slice does work.
Because if you just push in nested array,
Hmm.
it'll be the same thing as doing this, right? You're pushing in the reference to the old array, which
Hmm.
is what we don't want.
Yeah.
So doing this, making a new array, or doing dot slice, you're making a new array, right? And that new array we can push in because that will be a copy.
Okay. So dot slice just kind of inherently makes a copy of an array, like i.e. a new array, and that actually does kind of capture like the complex, like it captures the deeper element of the array, like by doing dot slice.
What do you mean
I'm,
the deeper
I'm just
element?
repeating what you're saying.
What do you
Sorry.
mean the deeper element?
Sorry. So like for me, initially I kind of came into it being like dot slice is just a copy, so
Yeah.
it's the same thing as pushing in like the actual thing. But what you're saying is actually like by doing nested array dot slice, it actually does kind of get to like a deeper element than just pushing in a nested array. Like that's what
Like
it sounds
As
like.
long as it's one dimensional, right?
like at this point in time, we're at a one-dimensional array, right?
Right.
If we just pushed this in, if we just pushed this into here,
Mhm.
then we would be pushing in the reference to the array that exists in here. What
Yeah.
dot slice does is it makes a new array and we push that into there instead. We fill that thing up with every. What I wrote here is exactly what slice does, right? It loops through the thing and makes a new array and pushes everything into there, right?
Okay.
But
Yeah.
these
Yeah.
brackets are different than the brackets that were inside of here. They're a different array. So
Yeah.
this different array is what we need to put into copy array. Because if we put the same thing into it, then it would be the same array.
Okay, right. And you're saying that dot slice kind of does create that. That's what you're saying. The dot slice does create that.
Yeah,
different
slice does this. Slice does this for sure.
Yeah.
It makes a new thing. It returns a new array. Whenever I say like this method returns a copy of an array, behind the scenes, this is what's going on, right? What that function does is it makes a new array, does all of its logic, and puts it into that array, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Cool. Any other questions on this? All right. So what are we going to do now? We're going to talk about higher order functions. 1. No. Okay. So, what are higher order functions? So, let's talk about functions a little bit, right? So, how are functions different from other values in JavaScript? Why are they special? Can I put functions in arrays? Can I put them as values in objects? Can I assign them into variables?
No, they're always at the most outer layer of global scope, aren't they?
Well, that's because you choose to put them there. You know? They can be at inner layers or wherever, you know? However, the main thing is that I need you guys to realize is that functions are not special, okay? They kind of are, but like we can do everything. We can put them in arrays, we can put them in objects, we can store them in variables, we can even pass them into other functions. They are just like everything else. And passing them into other functions is what we're going to be talking about today, right? So if I have this function like const run func, right? And what this function is going to do is it's going to take another function. And I'm going to call that a callback, okay? And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to run the callback inside of here. So if I have another function down here I'll make this one with the function keyword, because just to switch it up a little bit. Say hi, right? And I console.log. Right? And then I run func, and I pass in say hi, right? What I get is hi. Does this make sense? I took this function, I threw it into this function, and what this function does is it takes this parameter, callback, and it invokes it, right? So there's one thing I need you guys to understand. This callback is syntactical sugar for when you pass a function into a function. The function you're throwing into another function is called a callback, okay? That is terminology that you need to get familiar with, because people are going to be throwing that around left and right. So a callback is a function that you pass into another function, okay? So run func is the higher order function, okay? Does this make sense? This is like not too hard to understand, right? So let me give you an example. Let's say we're going to make a calculator but only using functions, right? So let's say I have const plus, which takes num1 and num2, and what it does is it returns num1 plus num2, okay? And let's say I had another function, const minus num1, num2, right? And then this returns num1 minus num2, okay? And now I have another function called calc, okay? And this is going to take num1, an operator, and num2, okay? So now, what would happen, oh wait, and then this is going to return operator, and it's going to pass in num1, num2. So what this is going to do is it's going to return this operator invoked with num1, num2, okay? So if I do console.log, and then I do calc, and I pass in 5 plus 5, I'm going to get 10, right? So let's, and if I console.log, and I do calc, invoke 1000 minus 44, what I get is 956, right? So let's walk through and see what I'm actually doing. Console.log calc invoked. Okay, so I'm invoking calc, and I'm passing in 5 plus, which is this function up here, and 5, right? So calc is returning operator. What is operator? It's the plus, right? So it's returning the plus invoked with num1 and num2. Num1, num2, 5, and 5. So plus will now run, and what does this do? It returns num1 plus num2, and we get 10, right? Same thing happens here. We pass in 1000 minus and 44, so we run minus and pass in 1000 and 44, right? So we get 1000 minus 44, and we get 956. Does that make sense? Any questions? I feel like it's pretty straightforward, is a little confusing to use on your own maybe, but everything makes sense. You can pass a function into another function, and that function that takes that other function, the function that takes that callback, is the higher order function, right? So let me show you an array method that is a higher order function that takes a callback, okay? So let's say I have let my array equal hello world goodbye everyone, goodbye everyone, Corona. Okay? So let's have that. It's just an array of random words, right? So let's say I wanted to make another array that basically says capitals, right? And I wanted to push everything in here that started with a capital letter, okay? So I can write a for loop and do this easily, right? Or I can do my array dot for each. And for each takes one thing. It takes a function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to define this function right here. Okay? Does everyone see how this is a function? And that's the thing that I'm passing to for each, right? Everybody sees that, right? So what am I going to do in this function though, right? So what for each does, for each passes automatically each element to your function. It also passes in the index. So what it does is it passes in the current element and the index, right? I don't need to use this index though, because it's the second argument. I don't need to use it, right? But the current element is something that I will need. And for each is, even if I don't account for this, for each is going to pass it in anyway, because that's what for each does. But I want to capture that element in a current parameter, right? So then I do an if statement inside of this, right? So if current at 0 is equal to current, if current at 0 is equal to current at 0 dot to uppercase, because what is current? It passes in each element one by one, right? So each element is a string, right? So current at 0 will be that h. And if that's equal to current at 0 to uppercase, if they're equal to each other, right? That means if it's an uppercase letter, then I'll do capitals dot push, and I will do current. So then down here, if I console.log, capitals, what I get is all my capitals. There's one other thing, before you guys ask questions, there's one other thing that you need to realize about for each, okay? For each returns nothing, okay? It doesn't return anything. If I wrote return true, right, it doesn't really matter. Because this function that I made, right, does everyone see how that's the function that I'm passing into for each? That function that I made is going to be run every single time on every element in the array. So what I'm doing in my function is I'm pushing into capitals, and I'm also returning true. Who cares? Who cares? If I say is equal to that, and I console.log, hello, is it going to be true? No, it's just going to be undefined, because for each returns nothing, okay? And when functions return nothing, they return undefined. Can everyone see this, though? That this function is going to be run on hello. We're going to check and see if it's in uppercase, and then we're going to push it into capital. Then we return true, okay? Then we run it on world, right? So for each loops through the array you're dotting off of, calls that function on every single one, right? And it passes in the current element, and it also passes in the index, right? So I could say like, so I could do like, hello is at index 0, world is at index 1, goodbye is at index 2, everyone is at index 3, corona is at index 4. It for each passes these things into your function for you. So you can write a function yourself that takes these things, and then you can alter other data outside, right? Instead of doing a loop. You could do a loop too, but this is just how for each works. Any questions on for each? For each is going to be tricky to use yourself, trust me, but it's okay.
If getting an error, I think I'm having a type error at current 0. It keeps saying current array 0 is not a function.
Are you using parentheses instead of brackets?
In the if statement, I have brackets for current, but it keeps saying the error is where my array is defined.
I don't know. I can look at your code later if you want, after the lecture.
Sure.
But yeah, this is what we got. Any questions?
How for each works with multidimensional arrays?
How does it work with multi-dimensional arrays? Is that the question? Yeah, okay. So, if I had like, at the end, I'll put it over here, right? If I had an array in here that said like, hello, and I'll do like, wash, hands, right? So these are capital letters that I also want to do, but this is in one array, right? As you can see, it's still that, but this is at index 3. Oh, and the reason why it's like this and not an array is because when you like add an array to a string, this is what happens. So like, forget that for a second. So if I console.log and I don't add it into a string like current, right? If I do that, then you could see that this array is at index 3, right? So if I'm checking current at 0, right? So if I say current at 0, what is current? Current's this array. So what's at 0? It's the entire string wash, right? Is equal to current at 0, which is wash, dot to uppercase, which would mean the entire string uppercase, right? So that's not true. So that will never go in there, right? Because now we're saying, like, this was set up to check one letter, right? To see if that letter was uppercase. But now we're checking to see if the whole word is uppercase, right? So that's not what we're doing, right? If I made this all like that, then we would get wash in here. But we would put the entire element in here because it's just doing something different. You know what I mean? So, like, it's the same thing as doing a loop through an array with another array inside. If there's another array inside, you have to account for that, right? So, like, I can do, like, else if array dot is array of current. Then I can do current dot for each. Which will take inner, and we'll do this whole thing. And then we'll do capitals dot push inner. And then we get wash and hands. So we do an inner for each, right? Which is fine. It's like an inner for loop. You can think of them as, it's doing the same thing as a for loop, right? It's just what it's doing actually is just the function you define, it's calling on every single element, right? So if that function that you write, and that's happening here, that function that you write has to account for all of those elements. So, like, if I threw an array in here, I wasn't accounting for that, but now I am. This is a mess, though. Any other questions?
Okay, aside from callback, is the callback the function within the function, or is the callback the outer function accessing the inner function?
The callback is the function within the function. The callback is the function that I am passing to another function. So in this case, look at the screen. In this case, the thing that's highlighted, I am passing into for each, right? So the thing that's highlighted is my callback, because I'm passing it into for each. And for each is taking that function, so for each is the higher order function. And it also happens to be in array method. Array method only, okay?
Sorry, and syntax-wise, my question is, yeah, syntax-wise, like, so it's like for each, and then it accepts the callback function, and then it also could accept an index, right? Just wanted to check.
For each does not accept an index. It only accepts the function.
Okay.
That function that you write, you're writing this, right? That function will take the current element, and if you want, the index. So
okay,
that inner function.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, that inner function takes these two things, right? But for each takes one thing, just a function.
But then it's on you to sort of like, write like kind of a similar thing like you did in terms of like, there's nothing automatic about like it interpreting the index. You basically have to write in like what the index does and where it starts and stuff like
100%, yeah. So
okay.
The only thing that's automatic with for each is that it loops through your array and it calls that function on everything, passing in the current element and the current index.
Okay.
What it does is up to you. Just like when you write a for loop and you loop through an array, what you do inside the for loop is up to you. But the loop is looping through your array, right?
Yep.
So sometimes if you don't need to return something inside of a loop and you just have to do a calculation, instead of writing the let I equals 0, I is less than array dot length I plus plus, myArray.forEach is sometimes just easier.
But you also don't have to use for each with a function, right? You could be mutating the elements in the array, right?
Yeah, but you still have to pass in a function. Like if I do like down here, if I do let my array equal to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I do my array dot for each, and here I'll do this function out here, right? So I'll do const times 100 is going to be equal to an array that takes a number, and we're going to be num times equals 100, right? So if I pass in times 100 to here, and then I console.log my array. Wait, what? That's not how it works. Oh, no. So we do... I did that wrong, my bad. So I do... Yeah, so here I don't even need that, right? So now I would do that. So I can change the array like that. You see how this works and not what I did before, right? So this is just a number, right? This variable would just be the number 1, right? So I'll say the number 1 is now going to be times equal 100. So the number 1 will be 100, right? But that's not actually changing my array index. So I do my array at index is now going to be times equal 100. So I'm accessing the array, whereas before I was just accessing the number. So yeah, I can change the array like that too, if you wanted to.
You can use a method within inside for each, which I guess is technically a function, but right?
What do you mean?
Well, like, could you use two uppercase to make every element in a?
Yeah, I mean, you're just writing a function. You could do whatever you want there. I used.
But can you pass in array dot to uppercase, or my array to dot uppercase?
Well, dot uppercase is a string function, string method.
Oh, string method, right?
So it wouldn't make sense to do like
object or in each element.
Huh?
It isn't for each doing it on each element. And if each element.
Yeah, I mean, if you did like if these were strings and you did num a string dot to uppercase, yeah, but you couldn't do like my array dot to uppercase, right?
Oh, okay.
That doesn't make any sense. But like if I did like my array dot push hello, you get that many hellos, right? Because it does it every single time. So it wouldn't make sense to push something into that array, right? Because this is never going to change. Any other questions? Before I go into the slides.
I'm having a problem with let my array. It says it's giving me the syntax error. My array has already been declared, but
you probably have it declared up where somewhere in the REPL. I can look at your code later though.
Oh wait. Yeah, I probably have other code at name my array. Let me just name it something else. It'll probably run.
Yeah.
Sorry, can you explain one more time why we need index? Yeah.
This here?
Yeah.
So like I'm saying my array at index, right? So my array at 0 is now going to change. like my array at that index will now be something different. Like my array is going to hold a different value. Whereas if I did num before, you're saying, okay, what is num? Num is just the number 1. It's not saying my whole array at the 0th index. I'm just saying the number 1. So I'm saying the number 1 is now going to be times 100, right? But that doesn't like have any reference to my array. So we have to reference my array here with the index.
Right.
So
Okay,
here we're
yeah.
utilizing the index. And as you could see, I made this function out here, and then I could pass it into for each like that. As long as I'm still doing this.
Okay. Yeah, I think okay, thank you.
No problem. All right. So let's go over some slides. So we're going to be talking about why functions are special. We're going to be talking about passing functions into other functions, callbacks, and we're going to be talking about for each. So why are functions special? So functions are special in JavaScript because they really aren't special. We think of functions as being different from other values in JavaScript, and strings, numbers, and arrays, we're used to passing them into functions, right? Or returning them from functions, right? But functions sometimes seem like they're in a different category. They're rooted to the line of code where they're defined. In JavaScript, functions are actually first-class objects, which is another way of saying that functions are like any other value in JavaScript. So we know we can push strings or any value into arrays, right? So as you can see here, we did let amazing array, let happy string equal happy, and we push happy string into amazing array 3 times. So as you can see, we have happy, happy, happy up here, right? Nothing weird. But functions aren't special, and we can push them into arrays as well. So if we have function, happy function, console log I am happy, we push happy function 3 times into amazing array, we get function, 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 right? This is fine. We can do this. How do we call all the functions in the array? How have we always looped through an array of values? So we have let amazing array is not going to be happy function, happy function, happy function, right? So we do let I is equal to 0. I is less than amazing array length. Then we do let element equal amazing array of I. Each element is actually a function, so we can just invoke it. And we get I'm happy, I'm happy, I'm happy. Does this make sense? Any questions? So passing values into functions. So we know we can pass strings or any values into a function, right? Like if we pass in happy string to logs of type and we console.log type of value, we get string. But we can also pass functions into functions, right? Because if functions are like any other value, that means why can't we do that, right? So functions that take a function or return a function, we'll talk about returning functions at 2, but those are called higher order functions. So if I have happy function that says console.log I am happy, and then we have function logs a type, which just console.logs the type of that value, and I pass in happy function to log the type, I get function. Does this make sense? Logs of type is the same thing as the last slide, right? But now I'm passing in this function, happy function, right? And what I get is function. If we want happy function to run, we have to call it. So now we have a function that says calls a function. It takes a parameter that's called another function, and what calls a function does is it invokes another function. And then we have a regular happy function. So when we calls a function and we pass in happy function, we get I am happy. Does that make sense? Is somebody?
Do we need to use the parameter another function whenever we're working with higher order functions, like whenever we're trying to pass a function in a function?
Well, you need to capture it using a parameter. I don't have to call it another function. I could call it callback or func or my var, something like that, you know? Just so we capture it and we can invoke it here. Cool. All right. Calls with name. So let's say we have a function that says hi, takes a name, and it console.logs hi name, right? So then we say function says by, and then we says by name, right? Cool. So then if I say function calls with name, which takes name and it takes a callback, right? And then I just call that callback and I pass in name. So if I say calls with name Sadie says hi, calls with name Sadie says bye, I get hi Sadie, bye Sadie. Does this make sense? Calls with name, let's walk through what happens on line 13. So I invoke calls with name, I pass in Sadie, and I pass in the function says hi. Calls with name. So name is Sadie, callback is says hi. On line 10, I invoke callback with name. So that means I'm invoking says hi with Sadie. Hi, Sadie. And that's what I get. Same thing with line 14, except with says bye. So let's say I have this function add world, and I pass in a string. So we have, and then it just returns the string plus space world. Right? And then I have this function that calls with hello. The function that returns a func and hello. Okay? It returns this function invoked. So it returns the return value of func passed with hello. So if I say let result equals calls with hello, and I pass in add world. So let's see what's going on. So right now JavaScript is saying, okay, you're declaring this variable result, and its value will be, oh, a function invocation. So we have to see what this returns. So we run calls with hello, and we pass in this function add world. So we run here. So this is going to return func hello, right? Which is really returning add world with hello, right? So that means add world is going to run, and string is hello. So we return hello world. So if this returns hello world, that means func of hello is hello world. So calls with hello returns hello world, and that's what we get. Does this make sense?
Can you walk through that one more time for me?
Yeah.
Sorry.
So we have, ignore all of this, right? So on line 12, we say result is equal to calls with hello, and we pass an add world. Calls with hello is this function, which we are going to call, and we're going to pass in this function, right? So that's basically what's going on. So now let's see what happens. Calls with hello takes a function, and it returns that function invoked. Okay? Func is add world. So it's going to return add world with hello, right? Everybody with me? So we're returning add world with hello. If we return a function that is being called, we have to run this function, see what that function returns, and then return that from here. So let's run add world hello. So we run add world, which takes a string and returns string plus world. But we called it with hello, so string equals hello. So we are returning hello world. So now that this is done running, we say, okay, what are we returning? What did func hello return? What did add world hello return? It returned hello world. So that means we are returning what this returns, which is hello world. So calls with hello returns hello world. So that means results is going to be the return value of that, which is hello world. So we get it up here. Sure. Does that make sense? All right. Here's another example. So let's say I have this function say to all, which takes names and it says say with name func. And what I do is I loop through names and then I call this function with everything at names. So then I have this group, Jane, Jill, Pip, Mike, and then I have this function say hello with name. So say hello with name takes a name, it says, and then it console.logs hello, and then name plus this, right? It's a string that says hello, name, and then the exclamation point, right? So I say to all, group, say hello with name. So what happens is, say to all is run, and we pass in this array, so that's names, and then this function I pass in here. So we do a for loop, we loop through names, and then we call this function, say hello with name, on every single member here. So we get hello Jane, hello Jill, hello Pip, hello Mike. Does this make sense? I think you did this 2 days ago, no? Call them all, basically. Call them all did the same thing. You looped through an array. What you did there was you checked to see if that thing was a function, and then you called it. Or, no, it wasn't an array, it was objects. You looped through the object, you checked to see if that thing was a method, if it was a function, and then you called it, right? Same logic here, except these things are in arrays. Any questions? All right. We can pass anonymous functions into another function too. So this is going to be the same thing, but now, instead of over here, how we have say hello with name function, here, we're just defining this function on the spot. So what are we doing? We're calling say to all, we're invoking it, we're passing in group as the first argument, which will be names, and then the second argument is this whole thing, this function we're defining right here, and that will be say with name func. And it effectively does the same thing. The only difference is that we define it here versus defining it here on line 10 and setting it equal to a variable. Any questions?
This is basically like kind of what for each does, right? The for each like loops through.
Oh, yeah, exactly. So the next slide, we'll talk about for each, because that's pretty much what it does, right? For each is a function passed into another function. Okay, so a function passed into another function is often called a callback, right? So some built-in JavaScript features use callbacks. So for each is an array method. It accepts a callback as its only argument, okay? For each calls the callback for each element in the array. When .forEach calls the callback, it passes the current element as the first argument of the callback, okay? So let bridges equal Brooklyn, Golden Gate, London, and then we have function log uppercase. What we do is we just console.log that string that we passed into here to uppercase. So we just console log the whole thing uppercase. So if we do bridges.forEach and we pass in log uppercase, what we get is Brooklyn, Golden Gate, London, all uppercase. Because for each dot bridges, it will loop through bridges, take the element, and pass it into log uppercase. Take this element, pass it into log uppercase. Take this element, pass it into log uppercase. And what does log uppercase does? It console.logs, it takes the string, so we're going to pass Brooklyn. Brooklyn will be string. Console.log string.toUppercase, we get Brooklyn. And so on and so forth. The callback passed into for each also takes an optional second argument. For each passes the current index of the element as the second argument. So function log with idx takes a string in idx. Console.log string is at index idx. So as you can see, we captured the index as well. Brooklyn is at index 0, Golden Gate is at index 1, London is at index 2. Any questions? Any questions? How's everybody feeling? We feeling good? Feeling nice?
It's like, I have a question. For the Sudoku project, we only have to do the JavaScript backend. We don't have to do like a front end interface for it or anything like that.
No, you just have to like solve it in REPL. Like take in that like array, and then the one that isn't true, like one that's true, one that isn't true, and make sure that your function can determine if this is a valid solution or if it's not.
I see.
Yeah.